Thanks for the introductions. Just to say, I'm very pleased to be here to address UCT alumni. I must say I'm not only at UCT, I'm also UCT. In 1986, I graduated with an honors degree from UCT, so I'm also UCT. Thanks very much. And secondly, okay, let me get straight into the topic. I'm hoping that I'll keep to the time. Initially, this was not my topic. Initially, I wanted to talk about all the great and wonderful things that we do in the Faculty of Humanities at UCT. But I was told that that is a boring topic, and I should find something serious, engaging, interesting, topical, and so on. So here goes for topical, interesting, boring, not boring. Let me start by talking about the events. Thanks very much for that clip. I think it kind of paves the way very nicely, and it also picks up on another angle about Marikana that we don't hear very often about. We hear about the men. There's another side to the equation, and that it does it very, very well. I hope you get a distinction for it. But the events of the 10th and the 16th of August really jolted South Africa and the world into a sudden realization that we live in a fragile society, that the new order is actually quite fragile. It's not that solid kind of thing that we talked about. We always talk about the rainbow nation with a wonderful constitution and so on. It's actually very fragile when you look closely at it. The nature of the deaths and the extent of the injuries. I should underline the injuries here, because very often we talk about the 44 dead. We forget about the hundreds injured in that situation. So the nature of the deaths and the extent of the injuries left an indelible mark in our collective memory as a country. Who can forget those visuals? Whether you got them very briefly on SABC when they had the time to show it, whether you saw the movie Miners Shot Down, whether you saw it on YouTube, it's the sort of thing that lives with you, that haunts you for a very long time after you've seen. And all of us, in one way or the other, we were touched in a very small but very enduring way by those events. But it was the kind of the ritual killings on the 10th. And now we don't talk about, when we talk about Marikana, we kind of, and I'll come back to this point. There's two moments at Marikana. There's the 10th and there's the 16th. The ritual killings of the 10th of August, including one person killed and with a cow's skull, lying, with his back on the ground, and on his chest was an old dry bones of a cow put on his shoulder, on his chest. So those ritual killings, that part on the 10th, as well as the execution-style manner in which the police basically mowed down people, all of that, it left us all in shock. And I suppose, and this movie shows it, these clips show it, that shock will continue for some to reverberate for a long, long time. In fact, for as long as they live. Not only were their families and fathers and brothers and husbands and so on killed, but they saw it. They saw it as if they were watching movies. So as the drama unfolded, then we witnessed this political contestation playing out. Lonmin management, for example, came in. And they came in with the most ridiculous thing. They wanted to arrest the rest of the workers, or rather they gave an ultimatum, They gave an ultimatum for a return to work the day after the killing, which is, it makes you wonder what world they live in. Government agencies also competed with one another, making really kind of idiots of themselves, ministers saying contradictory things, the president here, the Minister of State Security, the Minister of Police, Minister of Minerals. It was a feeding frenzy of statements, and I'll come to what those statements were about. But the political parties also joined that fray, from the Communist Party, which was kind of basically very, very pleased with what they saw, the ANC, of course, and other parties which came up in opposition. The trade unions, again, the trade union movement was also torn in two. One's saying, you started the trouble, you deserve what you got, with others saying, we've been killed defenseless. The workers, the communities, the families, and so on. So that all of that played out in, unlike most other conflicts that we're talking about, it's very rare that you see Sharpeville playing out in front of you in your living rooms. It's very rare you see 1976 playing out in this way. Or for that matter, and I'll refer to this, the Rand Revolt in 1922. You don't see it playing out in this way. This one is like a movie, kind of happening in real time. So, of course, many then drew parallels. They said, wow, this is Sharpeville. Sharpeville has come back. Others said June 1976. And others said Marikana is post-apartheid South Africa's first massacre. So that's Sharpeville. But let me before I go too far with this, so that I clarify things. What do I speak as here? I have a few capacities. I have the researcher capacity, and I've done research on these issues. I've done research in the mining industry. I've done research on trade unions. I've done research on changing forms of employment in the industry and other industries for that matter. At the moment, I'm co-authoring a book with a colleague at the University of Pretoria where we were, and on the mining industry, including the theme, the ever-running theme of violence in that industry. There's never a day, that's one of our findings, never a day passes without a death in that industry. Be it a death caused by occupational kind of issues and accidents, be it a death caused by so-called faction fighting, be it a death caused by police shootings, all manner of things. So it's an industry where violence is almost second nature to people living in that industry, and so it's a big issue. But tonight I don't want to speak as a researcher. I'll tell you what I'm speaking as. I'm also not speaking as Dean of Humanities at UCT. Deans are not appointed to pontificate about issues of a political or kind of social nature, such as Marikana, and too busy signing forms and dealing with all the bad press that UCT keeps attracting to itself in recent months. So there's very little time left to talk about things such as Marikana. So the third capacity, and this is the capacity I'm speaking as here. I'm speaking here as a citizen, like all of you, like all of us. I'm speaking as a person who lives in this country, but also I'm speaking as someone who was born and grew up in a rural village, living with, playing with, and being brought up by mine workers. Because my village was one of the source villages for migrant labor. Indeed, my own father was a mine worker. So I gained from that experience and from working, from growing up in that context, I gained a very intimate knowledge of the lives and needs and aspirations of mine workers as people. And of course, therefore, I was able to gain an experience, or rather insight, into both ends of the mining spectrum, the mine as well as the village, the men at work as well as the wives, the children, us, who never got to see the fathers. So most of the time. But through other forms of engagement, of course, I've also developed views like all of us have views. So I speak here as a private citizen in that sense, because these are issues that you unavoidably kind of touch all of us. And so that's what I'm let's start with how Marikana has been explained, the conventional kind of view of Marikana. Marikana is explained as a consequence of these workers making wage demands, which for many were deemed unrealistic and ridiculous. 12,500, how can they dare demand that sort of money for the lousy work that they do? That's the implication. Others, of course, blamed the new union, AMCU, for stoking the fires of violence and conflict in the industry, in opposition to the kind of established mine workers union, National Union of Mine Workers. Of course, others blamed it on local provocateurs. Now, this will, if you remember the old days of apartheid, this will kind of ring a bell to you. Provocateurs, ringleaders, agitators, that kind of thing. But you're not living in 1986. You're living in 2012. It was blamed on provocateurs, agitators. In fact, Mr. Gwede Mantashe even named the person. There's a Swedish woman who's married to a South African who lived in the Northwest Province. He fingered her as one of those provocateurs and was pushing hard to have her deported, despite the fact that she's married to a South African. So those are some of the explanations. But it went even further and more ridiculous. Some of them blamed it on witchcraft and muti. Those pictures of those men out there, naked or semi-naked, were flashed to say, this is why these people are crazy. This is a witchcraft crazed kind of bunch of men who are out of their minds, really, and they deserve what they got. Some people, including the General Secretary of the National Union of Mine Workers, actually said in an article to a journalist that AMCU was bewitching their union. And this was basically using witchcraft against their union. But of course, others have said, and I think there could be a grain of truth to this one, that there is in the mining industry historically, there's been not one culture, but many cultures of violence, and violence emanating from different quarters, from different constituencies. White men beating up black men fighting back, retaliating, black men against black men, Basotho men versus Shangaan men, all those stories, so-called faction fighting. And of course, very often management kind of stoking those fires. And then there's another explanation that's been proffered, namely that these people were heavily indebted to loan sharks in the Rustenburg region. I remember the police raided many of those loan sharks in the days, in the aftermath of Marikana, and came out with stashes and stashes of ID documents and bank cards. And that was one of the hypotheses put forward, that the reason these people are getting so ridiculous with their demands is because they're desperate. They're so heavily indebted. That's why. That's the explanation. And of course, there's another, and final, there's a whole series of explanations that were given. The other one was that, you see, because these men are migrants from Lesotho, from Mozambique, from the Eastern Cape, my village, and other places, from KwaZulu-Natal, Lesotho, because they leave their wives and their homes and their families there, and they live in the mining areas, the hypothesis was then that they take girlfriends, and the Sotho name for it is Nyatsis. They take Nyatsis, the Nyatsi hypothesis. Now, the Nyatsi hypothesis was that because this man has two families, there's a wife and children at home, and then there's the Nyatsi and her children on the other side, and he has to use this one wage to support both. And so went the explanation. And I know someone who wrote serious papers on this one, and serious papers in journals. Let's leave that for the minute. So that's one view, and that's a conventional one. That's one that's been peddled in the media, and variations of it. Sometimes in combination. Sometimes one thing kind of blown out relative to the others. But that's what we've been told about Marikana. And of course, with this picture, what you then begin to see is this bunch of men who are out of step with the modern world, who are out of step with the demands of the modern economy, and who, although many people would say they don't deserve to be killed, but were certainly out of order, some would say. Yeah? Some people would say they were out of order. Don't kill them, but they're really out of order. They're being silly. They're being ridiculous. And that's what. But let's look at an alternative way of looking at Marikana and why it happened. And I want to start with the migrant labor system. But the migrant labor system was invented to achieve a certain objective. And that objective was to keep labor costs low. The word we use it is cheap labor. You can call it any other name. And that cheap labor system has persisted right up until the present. And one clear manifestation, and it's in every sector, you can see it in every sector, but one, if you look at the economy as a whole, and you look at incomes in the economy, one manifestation of the cheap labor system are the disparities between the top and the bottom. You can go to any country, you can go to Sweden, you can go to any other country. You're never going to find them as stark as they are in this country. In one breath, Lon Min was arguing that these wages are impossible, there's no way they can meet them. But in another breath, some of the CEOs and the figures were being pasted on front pages of newspaper. These CEOs were, the bonuses were running into more than 100 million per annum at the same time. So surely then the cheap labor system has persisted into the present. And what we have, and this is a responsibility, one easy way is to say the ANC government has kept it intact, which they have. They are the government, so the blame goes to them first. But all of us as a society, we've basically we've learned to live comfortably with the cheap labor system. In all our spheres. Because the cheap labor system means many things. It means one thing for Lon Min, one thing for Impala, another for SAB, Coca-Cola, whatever the company. It also means something for us. It means many of us, even working class people in this country, employ a domestic worker. I mean, you go to some of the developed countries, many people, especially middle class people, just cannot afford to employ domestic labor. I lived in Germany, people cannot afford. They get a person to come and do cleaning for a couple of hours. And that's all. If you're really wealthy, you'll get them to come in 2 days to do 4 hours per day. That's really wealthy. But in this country, an ordinary person, a startup young graduate of, not UCT, a startup graduate of the university down the road, which is Wits, which is my university, with their first salary, they have no qualms about employing a domestic worker because that's how it's done. So cheap labor system is that thing that we all take so much for granted. So that's one part of the issue. And therefore, you have a scenario therefore where basically these same workers who right at the bottom, rock drill operators, who earn a pittance per month, was it 4,000 at the time? Around 4,000. The General Secretary of the National Union of Mine Workers at that point got a salary increase. His salary of 37,000 per month was increased by 40,000, was topped up with 40,000 to make it 77,000 per month. Now look at that disparity within an activist organization. 4,000 for the worker, 77,000 for the Union General Secretary. So these disparities, it's again, the finger pointing is very easy. It's the bosses out there. But some of the contradictions exist internally within some of these activist organizations. And I'll come to that now. The second issue that I want to raise about an alternative way of looking at Marikana is that the violent reaction of the police, and many have said the police reacted violently because 2 of their kind had been killed on the 10th. True, they were killed. But if 2 police officers are killed, what do? Do you then unleash violence on society? No. You set out detectives, you arrest those people, you try them, and you put them away for life. That's what any society does. If you're a killer, we set the detectives on you, we find you, we try you, we jail you for life. No. What did our police officers do? They went on a hunt. They went on a hunt. So that's one part of what happened here with the police officers. But secondly, the primary reason for Marikana and for the violence of the state was basically to assert the authority of the new ruling class. We are now in charge. We're going to show you who is in charge. That's it. We've had enough of you can say it in whatever way, you can paraphrase. We've had enough of this nonsense. We're going to put a stop to it. This is it. We're now in charge. And that's what it was, to assert the authority of the ruling class. Thirdly, the violence of the state was to basically say, we're going to redefine the boundaries of acceptable forms of protest. We're going to redefine them. You can protest, but you can't do X and Y. That's very, very, very important. I'll come back to this point. There was also a sense that these workers had become ungovernable. And therefore, the police had to teach them a lesson. But think about it also, an additional point, is that the police has become increasingly politicized, the police force. Increasingly politicized. We can see it all the time. We see it all the time with the spies and the crime intelligence and all of the stuff that's in the media. You know, it gets your head spinning. The extent to which they all vie for, favors by the political classes of society. So, for some in the police, in the leadership of the force, therefore, the actions were intended to stem a threat to the ruling party. That's what it was. To stem a threat to the ruling alliance. This violence was not violence unleashed on any group. It was unleashed on a group which was deemed to have crossed the line because they had broken ranks with the ruling party, and therefore they were fair game. That's the thing, fair game. And that's a very important point that many people have missed about it. That because they've broken away from the National Union of Mine Workers, which is in alliance with the ANC and the Communist Party, so they're fair game. The police can do anything. And that's what they did, because they knew they're not going to have a spokesperson. And of course, the ANC was also desperate to reassure business, local and international, that they're ready to take action to ensure economic stability. So beneath the fluff and the flurry of kind of some facile explanations about witchcraft and so on, there are real issues about the society generally, the society in which we live, and how it is being remade, how the terms are being changed in front of us. And so, which brings me to my next point then. Why would a democratic government authorize a massacre? Why would a democratic government authorize a massacre? After all, South Africa is a liberal democratic state with a very, very very famous constitution with all the safeguards and checks and balances in place. Why would a government therefore see it necessary to use force to the extent that they did? What factors made violence the preferred form of action here? But I want to start by saying that very often when a new order changes, we assume that the new order is clean. That it's like, it's like on a chalkboard. You take a duster and you clean it off, and you clean the slate and you start from scratch. But society doesn't work like that. Politics doesn't work like that. What we have, and this is my first point, therefore, to explain why a democratic government would do what this one did, that the new state inherited repertoires of repression from both the colonial system, from apartheid, as well as from the liberation movement. Those repertoires, those impulses that are repressive. That thing that says whenever there's violence, or rather there's a protest, where people feel the need to say, let's shoot them. We've had many ministers say that to the police, shoot them. Susan Shabangu, a former unionist, said once on public television, shoot them. That kind of thing. So we've inherited this. These are not new men and women who moved into power. These are men whose lives were deeply implicated in the past, and therefore the ways of thinking are also deeply kind of embedded in that past. And this includes my second point, even the language, the vocabularies that people use to refer to forms of collective action and to conflict have been carried into the present. Think about it. The terms that have been used to describe just the people at Marikana or the unions, those elements. Suddenly people become elements. I lived and I was involved in some way. I dabbled in politics. I was involved and I was around during the 1980s in struggles and so on. It was exactly the same words. There was a minister called Louis Nell, Minister of Information. He used exactly those terms, those elements, disruptive elements. So the vocabularies have been transferred straight into the future, into the present rather, from the past. The way people talk about it, the way where they wanted to deport a white woman from Sweden, just because she's white and she was born in Sweden, even though she's married to a black South African. Deport. How many people were deported by the apartheid regime? Thousands. Gwede wanted to deport a person in a similar way. So the language, the modes of doing things are very similar. So we also had the language of law and order. Today we have the language of law and order. In the old days, black people were, especially working class people, were subjects, not citizens. They didn't have rights. If you've seen the movie Miners Shot Down, you'll see exactly the same thing, where these people are subjects. As to what happens to their rights, as to what happens to, this is, I should make this point here. This was a strike which is governed by the Labor Relations Act, and it's very simple. In the Labor Relations Act, talks happen between an employer and employees. When there's a deadlock, many of you know this, when there's a deadlock, a dispute is declared, it's either sent to the bargaining council or it's sent to the CCMA. The workers then will ballot and they'll go on strike. The employer has the right to lock them out. The employer has got a right to drag the strike out, to starve them. That's all permissible. And suddenly, in walked the police. In walked the police, inexplicably. They walked in and they used guns to shoot people. It's beyond me. So it's that issue. It's some of the language. In the old days, there was a language called illegal strikes. Interestingly, in the new dispensation, in New South Africa, that word does not exist in the law. There's nothing like an illegal strike. It's an unprotected unprotected strike. The language has changed in the law. But what did the police say? They said, this strike is illegal. What did the Communist Party say? The strike was illegal. What did the ANC say? The strike was illegal. Again, so that transfer, and this is something that's happens very quietly, very subliminally sometimes in our day-to-day interactions, where the language of the past and the language of the future, of the language of the present kind of converge. But also the language of the former oppressed and the language of the oppressed also converge. They start speaking the same language to the extent that you think they've lived together for a long time. But also, just to make the point then that the violence thing is not just because of witchcraft or all these other things. It's also because we live in a society where we had hit squads, we had askaris. Where do you think they went? Some of them, of course, went into business, consultancies, security consultancies. Some of them became trainers of the very same police force. Some of them are kind of in the police force. But the mentality, the thinking is still there. We also had Amabuto, we had SDU, self-defense units in the townships. Where do you think some of them went? Some of them joined the police force. They are in the police force. We also had Mbogoto in exile in the ANC. Where did the Mbogoto people go? The people from the camps. The people who imprisoned and sometimes executed their own in exile. Some of them are in the police force, or some of them are in power somewhere. So those impulses to repress are present, and we always pretend that we are a neat, new, innocent democracy. Of course, mine workers have been viewed, and again in the movie, miners shot down, you'll see this. Miners are backward, they're barbaric, they believe in witchcraft, superstition and witchcraft, and so on. And the ANC did this. When the government authorized the massacre, they knew that we, society, would give them the benefit of doubt. And we have. We have given them the benefit of doubt. Maybe they didn't want to kill them. Maybe they were pushed too far. Maybe the thing had become too intolerable. That kind of, we give them the benefit of, these workers had pushed it too far. They killed 2 policemen. They knew how we think as society, that we'll give them another chance. And we have. Not only in terms of the way we think, but in electoral terms, we did it in 2014. We gave them the benefit of doubt, put them back in power. But the major change that has happened, and this is what Marikana, we should always remember about Marikana, that the ruling party and the ruling alliance has now become, to all intents and purposes, a party of the middle classes and the rich. You say whatever you want. You can say COSATU is in it. No. The COSATU leadership that's in it have actually become middle class. 1/3 of COSATU members work in the public service, as teachers, as nurses, as civil servants, as magistrates, you name it. And many of the other workers in other sectors also. We now have pilots who are members of unions. We now have professors who are members of unions. We have a whole range of people. So what COSATU has become, the major dominant impulse in COSATU, is that that impulse, the middle class impulse, has become predominant. And that explains the fractures that we see. I can talk about that another time. So in doing all of this, the ANC knew they could count on an increasingly middle class COSATU top echelon. And they did. Does anyone remember what COSATU said about Marikana after the shooting? I certainly can't remember. I can't remember not because I wasn't listening, but because they didn't say anything. They didn't say anything. In fact, soon after Marikana, they organized a rally in Rustenburg town. They said they want to claim those workers back into COSATU. And of course, They were chased away by the workers. So when Marikana happened, then there were several reactions, and I've kind of identified five one can speak about. There was, surprisingly, in certain quarters, people were jubilant, people were happy, people celebrated in certain quarters. They were happy that these people have been shown their place, that these people have been taught their lesson. There were people who were happy that we've put a stop to this once and for all. There was. There was also another reaction, perhaps milder, of satisfaction. Job well done. The Commissioner of Police gathered her forces on a farm for a debrief session. And she made a speech. And she says, I want to tell you that this is an excellent example of responsible policing. She called Marikana an excellent example of responsible policing. Job well done. Congratulations. That's the second one. The third one, which applies perhaps to a very large proportion of South African society, was that of indifference. Okay, Marikana happened. I get on with my life. I don't know those people anyway. It doesn't affect me. It doesn't change the price of bread. Fine. It's sad. Shame. Shame. How could they? But get on with your life. But there was also a stronger sense of dismay and shock. Again, in certain parts of this society. And of course, in other quarters, there was outright anger and outrage. So that's a spectrum of responses. And what Marikana therefore did, it tore us apart. Sometimes in very subtle, very imperceptible ways. But it kind of put us in different boxes by the way we responded. And of course, these reactions gave rise to different forms of activities. Some young students, it's amazing, you'll be amazed by the number of young people in the university, I was in Pretoria at that time, number of young people who are doing research on Marikana, who have been inspired very positively, just to find out more. Well, I suppose you count among them, who want to find out more about this trauma, about this moment. And there are many students, honors students, master's students, all they want to do is to study Marikana. And I think that's a positive thing. But there are other things that it did, other forms of activities. There was emergence of new movements, or rather new movements capitalized and used and got mileage out of Marikana. Part EFF and part other things. But there were also new forms of agitation. There's now NUMSA, among other reasons. The National Union of Metal Workers, it gave for breaking away from the ANC was the Marikana massacre. That this is not acceptable. And the media, of course, was full of these events and so on. Church groups became active. Lawyers became very, very active. I mean, lawyers, you're talking lawyers here, you're even talking old-timers. George Bezos is nearly 90 now, but he was right at the center of it, defending some of the workers, or rather standing up for some of the workers. So it galvanized a whole section or cross-section of society. Young people, the wives, they formed their own organizations. Other NGOs were formed for dependents and wives. The Falan Commission, we're still waiting. But there's also, there's a multiplicity across the country of rallies every year, 16th of August, of rallies, of seminars, memorial lectures that are given. So there's something that happens every day. It doesn't happen, at a high level, high profile. Sometimes these are very low-key events with very few people in attendance, but people still come. So, what does this mean then? Just to work towards concluding this. What does this mean then, South Africa after Marikana? Look, notwithstanding the reactions I've mentioned, satisfaction, indifference, whatever, life seems to have continued. It continued as before. We still go home, we go to work, everything seems to work as before. Now, the 3 moments when you had massacres of a comparable, I'm not talking magnitudes, I'm not talking numbers of people dead, I'm just talking in terms of shock factor. The one was the Rand Revolt in 1922. Many people don't know about it. White workers this time, and the Smuts government. The Smuts government basically used the Air Force and the Army to put them down, put the thing down. They grabbed the leaders, they hanged them. That's it. And they thought they dealt with it. It's neat. Of course, the miners came back in 1924, organized and mobilized with a coalition and voted Smuts out. They got their own government in. Okay? Sharpeville, 1960. People in Sharpeville went to the police station to burn their passes, or rather to return their passes, or not carrying their passes rather, and they were shot and killed. At least 69 were dead, many others injured. Sharpeville became a turning point in the same way that 1922 was. Major turning point globally. Apartheid was for the first time out there. Out there, there was no way of denying it. And it changed the lives of everyone, of many people. All of us. Again, 1976, June 16, happened in a similar way. It changed the way life was lived in this country, especially for young people. It propelled young people to the forefront of the resistance movement. Now, Marikana, life carried on. We had an election last year, nothing changed. Really, nothing changed. So that's a puzzle. That is a puzzle. Why does that happen? And to take it further, none of the new movements that have been formed, whether it's AMCU, the union in Platinum, or the EFF, or some other party or small little movement, none of them have inherited the mantle of Marikana. None of them have walked away as the party, as the movement of Marikana. The EFF is a kind of is a composite of various things. Disgruntled youth league members, expelled youth members there, some people who had something to do with Marikana, but not much more than that. And they cannot at any time say, we are Marikana, we are the movement of Marikana. They can't say that. They can't say that. And none of the others can. So Marikana remains a big trauma for us. At once it is nobody's trauma and everybody's trauma. And for precisely that reason, I want to make this point, for precisely that reason, Marikana will continue to linger on for us, for precisely that reason. The 2014 elections came and went without causing any ructions of a serious nature in terms of the continued electoral hegemony of the ruling party. But, and perhaps for the very reasons that I've outlined here, Marikana continues to haunt our collective lives. Marikana continues, it haunts our lives like the proverbial ghost. It's present, and yet we don't see it. We don't see it, and yet it shapes the way we think. It keeps tugging at our collective and individual conscience every day, persistently posing hard questions to us about our humanity. What kind of humanity part of humanity? What kind of society are we that can turn a blind eye? So after all the actions taken to maintain law and order, my point is this: Marikana keeps poking our conscience. And after all, the actions were taken in our name. That law and order that the Commissioner of Police sought to impose and maintain, she did it in our name. In your name, in my name, all of our name. And for that reason, this is going to be with us. It's not going to be to move away from us. And of course, we should know better by now that every society at some point has to grasp that nettle. It has to, if this be the ghost that we have lurking in our midst, then at some point we're going to have to grasp that nettle and exorcise that ghost. We're going to have to at some point. So, the question is, for all of us, what's the point and what's the wisdom of self-imposed amnesia, as there seems to be the case in the country? Marikana happened, but it didn't happen. We forgot about it. What's the wisdom of us forgetting so easily and so conveniently? Should we derive comfort from the fact that we do not know when that point will come, when that moment will come? So let me conclude by making 2 points. The first one is, whatever we think about these events, Marikana brought to an abrupt end the innocence of the young republic, the young new South Africa. Like the child who rather prematurely engages in an act that catapults them to the phase of adulthood. That's what Marikana did to us. That's what Marikana did to us. That loss of innocence means that liberators can also commit massacres. In this time, my second and last point, we've seen how power has contaminated the liberators such that it's hard, if not impossible, to distinguish between the oppressor and the oppressed of yesteryear. I think that's what Marikana says to us. That innocence, that thing, that fiction that many of us want to hold on to, that we have a liberation movement that cares for all of us, and that we have an oppressor that was lurking who wants to return. The fact of the matter, it's hard to tell anymore. Thanks very much for inviting me. Okay, that's much better. That's much better. Right. Do we use a microphone? I think. Yeah. So who's starting?
Let's start from the front.
Fine. Go ahead.
Do you have any particular hopes for the outcome of the commission?
Let's take in batches of 3 so we save on time.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think Marikana did indeed signal the end of innocence, and for a lot of us, our blinkers fell off because we realized that, yes, this is a democratic state, but, we're no longer in the honeymoon that the Rainbow Nation is supposedly in. And we see this in the fact that when citizens, for instance, want to engage with the state, they send armed police or soldiers to confront them, yeah? These are unarmed citizens who just want to engage around socioeconomic issues. And these have been termed these have been termed service delivery protests. We've seen this instance again with policymakers. The riot police was sent into parliament. So I think that Marikana was unfortunate, but for a lot of us, especially those of us who were not, who did not grow up in the struggle, the June 76s and all that, it showed us another face that the state is ready to sanction the use of violence against its citizens, and that is a very worrying thing. So I just wanted to say, it's not that we're complacent. I think that it has left an indelible mark, not just in our hearts, but in our minds as well. And maybe you can advise on what is the best way as citizens of engaging on these issues.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. The miners were armed. They were armed with dangerous weapons. Not only the police were killed, their own were killed, of their kind, the miners. The security of Lone Mill was also killed. Now, you identify it as just a labor issue. I want to know now, should, not the police, should we have waited until the strike is over, until more lives have been shared for the police to move in? That's my question. Yes, you said, I take your point. Yes, you said it, but your point was in relation only to the police. When the two police were killed, what do? Do you unleash violence?
Okay.
Against them? You said you send the investigators, the detective, to go investigate. But that is my question. Should we have waited? I'm not condoning.
No. These are difficult issues. Let me start by the events of the 10th of August. 2 police officers, 1 security guard, and the rest were workers, Lone Mill workers who were not part of the strike. Or put it this way, who were members of the National Union of Mine Workers, whichever was the case. And look, this is something I've written about. What we used to call ungovernability, what we used to celebrate, what our very movements, and I'm saying our, not now, I don't have a movement now. Our movements then used to encourage us as young people to make apartheid unworkable and the country ungovernable. And all methods were used to make things ungovernable. None other than Mrs. Mandela stood on a platform. I'm making this point very carefully and in a very measured way. None other than Mrs. Mandela stood on a platform, a stadium full of people, and said, with our matches and with our necklaces and matchboxes, we shall liberate this country. Now, and we applauded. We loved it. That's how we liberated the country. Let's say for a minute. That culture of ungovernability has continued to find its way into the present. We know it. Every time SATAU, the COSATU affiliate, the security guards, when they strike, people die. But because it's inside COSATU, did police move in? No, they did not. They did not. Every time, I do know, because I have observed these instances, the Metro bus in Joburg, when they went on strike. Drivers were killed. Did the police move in? No. I'm saying, therefore, that the culture of ungovernability is present, and it is a problem. That's why I mentioned the ritual killing in particular. It's something that people have turned a blind eye on, people that they've explained away, as if, it doesn't matter. That's the issue. Now things have, those same workers, if they were in the NUM, I'm sure the state would not have moved in the same way. But let's park that for a minute. The point, therefore, is this. What state, what government can afford to do what this one does? We talk Marikana here, Vicksburg, Andres Tatane, and the list is endless. The list is endless. People die just like that. So the point is this: we have a trigger-happy police force. You don't have to have a movement, or you don't have to belong to any movement or a party to see that this is dangerous. So I'm saying therefore, that the Marikana thing was played badly by the police officers, who are politicized, who are trigger-happy. It was played badly by management of Lonmin, who should have known better than calling the police or letting the police into that dispute. It was a labor dispute. That's what it was. It should have been managed well. The problem is that you don't have sufficient wisdom all around. And thirdly, let's put it much more sharply. COSATU sacrificed those workers. Let me put it that way. Let's not put it about. Say COSATU in the largest, in broadest sense, National Union of Mine Workers and all their allies. They sacrificed those workers. Violence. We've seen violence. So I really can talk on this one. I'll work with the questions in reverse order. So I'm saying, yes, the police should have waited. In fact, the police should have stayed in the barracks. And management should have engaged better, competent people to run a labor relations dispute. That's what they should have done. The union should engage better specialists to help them work through the issues. What one found there was a question where a union has lost credibility, has lost legitimacy with its own members. That's the problem. That's the problem. Now, let me give you another example with that union. A few years back in 1999, thereabouts, there was a region, and the chairperson of the region was a person called Selby Maise. You probably know Selby Maise. Now, Selby Maise was the chairperson. The union went to negotiate about the pension fund. And the positions were polarized. The union office wanted the workers to be paid in installments because they believed that workers are going to take the money, squander it, buy a taxi, crash it the following day, and be bankrupt. So they thought for the workers. The workers wanted their money and wanted to get out of that industry. That's it. Give us some money. Let's go. So, of course, they went and signed a deal with management. The money will be paid out in installments. So Selby and his comrades went to report to a rally in a stadium. What happened? The workers, as soon as he finished giving the report, the workers from one section of the stadium charged at Selby and stabbed him to death. Did the police move in? No. And there's another guy who is also an office bearer of the union. He was lucky. He got off without an eye when members charged at him and attacked him. So what I'm saying is this: you have a culture of violence in that industry. And for as long as society doesn't understand this, we all going to be swayed and back and forth by politicians who find it convenient to tell this or the other story. As you know, now how can citizens engage? That's a difficult question. I think that's a question for all of us to go away and consider, kind of turn it over in our sleep. But I think I've been seeing very interesting things. As I said, I really am impressed by the generation of students across the country, different universities, who just want to do research on Marikana, who want to document that moment for future generations, if nothing else. But also who want to understand and improve their understanding and personal growth. So that's one way. But there are other arenas where people could be active. I mean, this organization of the women, the widows, is another platform that people can engage in. I mean, think about it. Think about the children and extended families of those minors. I think that one is something that in every moment of this kind, every moment of trauma, always throws up ideas. And I don't think it's for one person to kind of prescribe what can be done. These moments throw up things. Think about 1976, what happened. All sorts of kind of activities flourished as a consequence of people applying their minds to it. So but I think it's if nothing else, I would suggest that we all at least need to talk about it. Not to go into our rooms or bedrooms and cover our bed and talk about it in our sleep. No, it's something that should be a matter of public debate by all citizens. And for once, we need to step back from our political pedestals. The one thing that bedevils proper and constructive debate about moments of trauma such as this is the political grandstanding that we start engaging in. Once we do that, then we can get constructive ideas. The Farlam Commission, I don't know. It's going to be a difficult one. I spoke at a seminar there. They organized a seminar at WITS last year. I spoke there, and at this, sitting in front was the police general who ordered the shooting, General Mpembe. He's the one, right? General Mpembe. And he raised his hand after I finished speaking. And this is a kind of side issue, but I think it's relevant here. He raised his hand and he said, but he said, I was talking about the Labor Relations Act and this is a dispute and so on and so forth. But he said, but isn't the Labor Relations Act a foreign imposition? Now, this is a police officer presuming to talk about, with some wisdom, about labor law. So what I'm saying is that whatever the outcome of Farlam is going to be highly contested. It's going to be high contestation. I think Judge Farlam is I think he's a very open-minded person. I mean, he opened up, commissions of inquiries, the commission of inquiry in ways that I haven't seen commissions of inquiries opened up before. There were seminars, there were constituencies were given platforms to speak and so on, which was unusual. Commissions of inquiries, as we know them, they happen in dark rooms, behind closed doors, and they're secretive. And the results, in fact, very few people ever see their reports. Always shrouded in kind of secrecy and mystery and so on. I think what Farlam has done is to open it up. And for your information, what the Farlam Commission, they have a website where they document verbatim everything. About a month or so after the seminar where I spoke, I went on the website, word for word, my presentation was there. They've got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of pages of stuff that's available for the general public, for researchers, for members of the public, for lawyers, I suppose, for anyone to go and see. This is before the report itself. So hopefully, if the report itself, and I'm sure he'll make good recommendations, but I do worry that they may not be taken very kindly. I do worry that it may go down the same path as other commissions of inquiry. Was there a commission into elections in Zimbabwe some time back? Yeah, there was a commission. Has anyone ever seen it? No. That kind of thing. So it may go down that path, but I think he's done a good job and surrounded by a number of very, very good, well-meaning and solid people. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we said we're going to take another round, right? Okay, so if that will be the last, no? Can we get another indication? Okay, we'll do 1, 2, 3, in quick succession, and then we close it.
Good evening, Professor.
Thanks.
What I'd like to say is that thank you for the enlightenment. And it brings back to a puzzle that we already have. We are in 3 generations, so to speak. You have the people that were there in the apartheid and the struggle times. And then you have us that sort of were young when the country was being freed. We were not enlightened much. We didn't see all this, but we're the 80s generation, so to speak. And then you have the born frees who are free to think because they're more objective. They hear about it, but they want really, they're not too home to it. And we've got all these political parties who speak to us and interfighting amongst each other as who should be followed. For us, the middle generation, it's a huge struggle because, yes, we need to get off the pedestal, and I think Marikana was a rough awakening for us, and you find things like what happened 2014 elections, where some people were just refusing to vote. It was a no vote. They were ruining votes. And it's an internal struggle because you do not know, you have that no, you can't go to that political party. It will take you right back to what used to happen. At the same time, really there is no option because the political parties that are coming out, the EFFs, you listen to what it's a struggle for us. You find yourself really wanting to just fold your arms and say, like what you're saying, not wanting to have a political party. At the same time, you are pressurized by society. You are working for this government, because some of us are working for the government. So you are supposed to be behind the government, but it's a problem. How does one deal with such a scenario of where to turn? Because we are caught in between a rock and a hard place in South Africa. There really isn't one single political party that I see to look up to, because Marikana is worse because no one did anything about it as far as I'm concerned in all political forums. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. And then just one there and one.
Thank you, Professor, for the question. I think what I want to ask is, you spoke about the complacency of South Africans after the incident happened. And I'll particularly talk about the black South Africans who generally vote for the ruling party. Do you think that the ruling party has created a system where the comforts of what the liberation has given us as black middle class overpowers our view of what they sometimes do wrong, and then our decision is then influenced by the comforts that we have in the illustrious Sandton and Hyde Park that we happen to live in sometimes?
Okay, thanks. Okay, the last one.
Thank you. An excellent analysis and presentation. Thank you very much. Elsewhere, perhaps, such tragic event would cause toppling of the government, as, for example, happened in Greece in the late 60s and early 70s with a military coup where they charged the Technicon. The indifferent group you mentioned, by far the majority, I suspect it might not be voluntary, but more out of ignorance. Everybody is one man, one vote, and I'm sure a lot of these people who have voted for the present government haven't even seen a newspaper, let alone have read one, and how much would they have known about Marikana? So they would still vote for a government that gives them the pension and makes them feel secure. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Okay. These are. No. Ignorance, perhaps, but I think in this day and age, mass communication reaches down to every level of society, especially radio. I think we tend to underestimate the power of radio and the reach that it has to every corner, every remote corner of the country. I think people have heard about it, and people are kind of touched in certain ways. I think you are right, and this goes, it goes alongside the question about the comforts. But it also touches on your question. The fact that we work for, let's say a person works for a government, the fact that a person benefits from a government places no obligation on them to vote for a particular party. But I think that may be in operation here. It's people who know about Marikana, people who are touched by the pain of Marikana, but people who feel that, and there's this threat that's kind of waved. It's amazing. If you don't vote for us, the white government is going to return, and apartheid is going to return. I'm telling you, it doesn't matter what. No white government is ever going to run this country again. In my observation, never. It's just never going to happen. But that is used in every election. So the implication, by extension, is that, therefore, the white government is going to return, they're going to take away your social grants, the middle class, you're going to feel the squeeze, and you might face a downgrade, and so it's in your best interest to kind of maintain the status quo. I mean, that's a big issue. That's a big issue. If you look at the subtext around every election, that's what it is. You're going to hear it next year around municipal election. That's what's going to happen. And once the election passes, then we continue. I said I don't have a party, but I'm a voter. Make no mistake about it. I don't have a party because I'm in a job that keeps me very busy. I can't afford to take even a few minutes. But when it comes to voting, I vote. And I think there's a difference. There's a difference. People sometimes think that in order for you to vote, you must belong to a party. It means there's nothing like that. I think many people, political scientists and others have said, well, let's wait for the maturing of the electorate. I also don't believe that. I really don't believe that there's a moment when the electorate matures and then therefore they can move their votes around and so on. I think there's a whole dynamic that's in operation here. That past is still with us. Those ways of thinking are still with us. And I think it's for us to think about these issues. But I'm intrigued by the middle generation issue. I'm really intrigued by them. I'm also intrigued by this idea that the born-frees are objective. It's a fiction. It's an absolute fiction. The born-frees are the ones who are going to rise against the system. They're the ones who are going to run. The very notion of born-frees, it means that they are pure, they're not contaminated, they're not touched by it all. But they're born into this. They're born into this fractured society. They're born into this poverty, unemployment, disparities in wealth distribution in the country. Surely those people can't be born-frees. Those people are part of this mess. The middle generation, there was the time, I can relate to it, when it was, don't talk about the past, you're dragging us into the past. If the middle generation opts for that, they do it at their own peril. Any society that doesn't want to understand its own history is a doomed society, in my view. I'm going to leave it there, and maybe we can talk about issues outside. Thanks very much once again. Thanks for your attention.